Set timers are really useful, but to properly use them, we're going to learn the concept of threads. Here's a hotkey with a while loop. The idea is a toggle. You press the hotkey once, the tooltip starts following your mouse. Press it again, it disappears. But it doesn't disappear. The hotkey doesn't work the second time. Max threads per hotkey fixes this, but it's much better to use a set timer instead. Now, the toggle is working as expected. Press once to enable, the second time to disable. Now, why does it suddenly work? Threads. AHK is single-threaded, meaning only one thing can be done at a time. While a line is executing, nothing else can be done in that moment. In other words, the thread is occupied. However, while the interpreter is switching from one line to another, there is a time period when the thread is not occupied. Now, it's not actually after every single line, more like every 16 milliseconds or so, depending on your CPU. This is because of how Windows works. It needs to disperse resources between all the numerous processes running at the same time. In those 16 milliseconds, Windows checks for anything to do with a higher priority. It might not find anything, but the check will happen regardless. That's where set timers jump in. Once that check period is on, the set timer goes in between and executes whatever it needs to. So, instead of occupying the thread once it's completely free, it waits for the moment to interject into the thread that's currently running, and does its thing. That's why a set timer that runs every millisecond is pretty much the same as 16 milliseconds, because set timers wait for the nearest window they could jump into. So, they are limited in how often they can occupy the thread. Other precise methods to measure time are also limited in AHK, due to this same issue. When trying to test the time complexity of your function, you probably tried using tick count. You didn't get precise results because the precision of tick count is also about 16 milliseconds. So, if you want to time your functions, you can either increase the input massively, or use the DLL call method that times a process. Don't ask me, I have no idea how to use it. Coming back to why the while loop method didn't work. The hotkey takes up the thread, and you can't use another hotkey while this one is in progress, because once again, the thread is taken and only one thing can be done at a time. However, timers don't take up the thread as aggressively. Instead of taking it all for themselves, they say, hey, I want to take the thread as soon as I can, not as soon as literally now. That's what async is, at least in the context of AHK. And the only way to achieve this semi-async is using timers. Let's see how blocking the thread works in code. Here we have a function that returns 0 the first 19 times it's called. Once you call it more than 19 times, it starts returning the number we've been incrementing. In the first scenario, we have a loop that keeps calling the function. On the 20th iteration, it shows the first info and breaks. After that, we have the second info. And as you can see, the order is how it's supposed to be. Here we have the same thing, but with a set timer instead. Even though we call the set timer first, when we run the script, the order is reversed. This is because a timer does not occupy the thread. It basically says run this function object at every next opportunity. So, the second info runs before that first opportunity. This is big, as I'm sure you'll realize through trying out timers for yourself. Your understanding of threads is the most important knowledge for set timers. Right now, we're going to get into the actual specifics. The first parameter of a set timer is a function object that you want to execute. I go into detail on function objects in my video on them, as well as my video on arrow functions. Then you have your period in milliseconds. Here, the function object will be called every second. If you specify a negative time, the timer will run only once, getting automatically deleted afterwards. If you have multiple timers, which one goes first will be decided by which is the closest in the timing. If it's the same, you can make one timer more important than the other using the third parameter, priority, although you don't have to use it. When you want to delete a timer, meaning stop it, you specify 0 in its period. If the thread where you disable a timer was launched by a timer, you don't have to specify anything in the first parameter. However, if it's not, you have to specify the same function object in the first parameter. Even if your arrow functions are exactly the same, they won't work, because they actually resolve to different function objects in memory. If you want to use arrow functions, you'll have to extract it into a variable, and then use that variable. Same exact thing goes for the bind method. But once again, not needed if the timer deletion is in a thread called by that same timer. That's about it on our tutorial on threads and set timers. I hope this video helped you clear up how both of those work. Have a good day.